All right, so I want to start with a working definition of stress. There's a lot of different definitions. If you go online or Google it, people will kind of describe it in different ways. But this is how I define it because I think it's really useful. So the physiological response to a meaningful event or thought. So here's what I mean by that. Stress is something we experience in our body, right? So there's an outside trigger, something that happens. So perhaps it's, I got a child who's screaming and having a fit and I'm trying to get out the door. Perhaps I've got a stressful meeting I have to have with my manager or my supervisor. Perhaps I'm confronting somebody on the street about something. It can also be an internal thought, real or imagined. I'm anticipating something that I have to deal with. I'm anticipating a conversation I have to have with my partner. I'm thinking about this deadline for this project that's due. So it can be outside of us, it can be within us, but it's something important and it has to be something meaningful. We don't get stressed about things we don't care about that aren't important to us, right? So it's a response to something meaningful and important. And it's physical. It's the knot in our stomach. It's the heart rate going up. It's our breathing shallow. It's a physical response. It's our muscles getting tense. So it's a physiological response to a meaningful event or thought. And notice it's neutral because stress is important. We need stress, right? Stress is how we escape from saber-toothed tigers. It's what keeps us alive and safe. So understanding that, I think it's also really useful to understand hormones, the hormones that get released. So kind of going back to that, how we get there, so just the kind of physical response, really quick what happens. So there's the event, there's the thought, there's our amygdala, which is in our limbic system, the emotional center of our brain. That's fight, flight, freeze. That sends a signal down our nervous system to our adrenal glands, which then pump out hormones, right? It's useful to know about this because the hormones are important, and there are some that we don't really consider. And this is why stress can actually have a beneficial effect. I thought that was clever. I don't even listen to the Ramones, but those are the Ramones, hormones. I was like, oh, okay, I think I'll get a picture of the Ramones. I don't even listen to it but I was proud of myself. So let's start with cortisol first. Cortisol it's referred to as a stress hormone. That's the stuff that suppresses our digestion system. It's the reason why I'm not hungry right now. It's the stuff that can suppress our immune functioning. Cortisol is a big piece of the stress response. A lot of people know about that. Adrenaline, we know about adrenaline, right? That gets our heart rate pumping faster. We get our blood flowing to our muscles. We're ready to fight, right? So parents lifting cars to save their children, right? That adrenaline is going. We know about that. DHEA is a stress hormone that most people, we don't think about. I haven't known about for that long. DHEA is a neurosteroid. It actually makes our brain work better. And it's also released during stress. DHEA is considered to counter some of the effects of cortisol. So it actually improves immune function. It's been known to mitigate aspects of anxiety and depression. So DHEA is like actually a wonderful thing and is really a useful chemical that's released in response to stress. Oxytocin, another one, sometimes that's called the cuddle hormone or the love hormone. It's what draws us to connect with people. When we're in a relation, when we're affectionate, when we're with someone we love, we often release oxytocin. Well, it turns out that oxytocin gets released primarily in response to relational stress. When we have stress that's in response to a meaningful relationship, oxytocin gets released, which is interesting. I think the purpose of that is probably because it's a signal that says, I need connection here. I need to be with other people. We're not supposed to be isolated. So a normal stress response, these hormones get released, the stress goes away, we go back to our baseline. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to work. However, what happens is, and this is where we hear about the problems of stress, is chronic stress, when the stress doesn't go away. And it doesn't take long. What happens is, over time, the cortisol gets elevated and it stays elevated. The DHEA, it starts to come back down. And over time, with chronic stress, we have elevated levels of cortisol, and then we have lower levels of the good stuff that we need, the DHEA. And one study showed that it only took 28 days of prolonged stress and in that time, within 28 days, cortisol levels were 240% of starting value, and DHEA dropped 15% below starting levels. So chronic stress, chronic cortisol in our system, and it also affects our hippocampus, which is responsible for learning and memory. So all these things are compromised when stress is chronic. So what we need to do is figure out how to harness the stress response, the benefits of it, that DHEA, and keep ourselves from being in this chronic state of stress. Not remove it, but relate to it differently.